من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين ورحمة للعالمين وصلى الله على آله الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أوصيكم عباد الله ونفسي بتقوى الله. Let me begin by extending Eid Mubarak to all of you, including those who were there for Eid prayers. As I had said, I'm going to make the Juma Khutba very brief today. But by looking at everyone here, I thought maybe I should do a little bit more justice. So nothing has been planned or thought about, so let's see how it goes. Salawat. One of the surahs that we recite in Salatul Eid is Surah Shams. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this style that He is looking at the audience. He is talking to human beings. And because of that, He has to adapt the method of speech that we are familiar with. And one of the things that we use among ourselves when we want to emphasize a point is the use of qasam. Qasam means, I swear I didn't do this or I did that. When you say swearing in the name of someone or an entity or something, you're trying to emphasize that what I'm saying is the truth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the same, approach when He's talking to us. Now we can say Allah, by Allah I didn't do that, because Allah is greater than us. Or we can take the name of Rasul or the Imam. Many people are afraid to say by Hazrat Abbas, because they are afraid that if they say something false, the repercussions will be there right away. But anyway, so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses qasam, there is nothing greater than Him. So what does He do? He uses the elements which are symbol of His power and glory. And so in Surah Shams you will see He starts with وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا. He swears by the sun and the moon, وَالنَّهَارِ, and then وَاللَّيْلِ, the day and the night. And then He talks about the heavens and the earth. These are all symbols of His power and glory. When you talk about His sun and the moon, and one of the results of that is the day and the night. And then He talks about the heavens and the earth that He has created. And then He comes to a very important, precious element that He has created. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. And then He says, by this soul of the human being that I have created. And then He comes to this point, praising this nafs of a human being. He says, and the way He built it, فَعَلَهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. He inspired to the nafs of every human being the essential ability to know what is right and what is wrong, to absorb the guidance which comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so after all this qasam of the sun and the moon and the day and the night and the heaven and the earth, and in the soul of the human being which has been inspired with the ability to know or accept the guidance for what is right and wrong, Then he comes to Jawab Qasam. That was all, buy this, buy this, buy this. What? This is where then he comes now to the statement. For all this Qasam, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Successful is the person who keeps that nafs, the soul of the human being, that he keeps it purified. And failure is the person who lets it become, dirty or corrupted by sins. And this is where we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the potential of guidance to every human being. And after all these, qasam of the great signs of His power and glory, He says, this is the nafs that I have created and I have given you this ability, but then it depends. The guidance is there. The ability to accept that guidance is there. But you have to keep the soul, the nafs, purified. If you let the sins, surround it, then it will be dirty, it will be covered. But it's not that the nafs, even though it's surrounded with sins, doesn't have the ability to accept the guidance. Then it has to be purified. You have to go through the process of tathir. It's just like the bulb that you switch it on, it's giving light. But if it has been there for many, many years in a dark room, which have not been swept or dusted, you will see the bulb will have, a layer of dust on it. Although the switch is on, but the light is not coming through. So the source is there. The light is in there, but it is covered by sins. You have to clear it, and then you will see the light is shining through. And when we talk about the tathir of the nafs, this is where we talk about the issue of Tawbah. The water purifies the body, and Tawbah purifies the soul from the dirt of sins. And so that is the essence of this, Surah Shams that we recite in Namaz Eid. Of course, the rest of the surah is more about example of those who did not avail the guidance in the right way. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq, to maintain that purity of the heart so that we can see that light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us through the guidance of the Anbiya, Mursaleen, A'imma, and the revealed book. إن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله العزيز بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحليم الكريم وغافر الذنب وقابل التوبة وهو الغفور الرحيم ونشهد أن لا إله إلا هو العطوف للعباد بجوده والعواد على المضربين بحلمه ونشهد أن محمدا نبيه وحبيبه سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين ورحمة للعالمين وصلى الله عليه وآله الداعين إلى سبيل الله بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة قادة الأمم وأولياء النعمة ومعدن الرحمة أوصيكم عباد الله بالتوبة ما سلف من ذنوبكم. Going on to the other surah that we recite in Namaz Eid, Surah al-Aʿlā. There, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically talks to the Prophet, don't worry about forgetting the ayat of Quran which are revealed. We will take care of that. And then he says, فَذَكِّرِ النَّفَعَةِ الذِّكْرَى. Remind the people if the reminder is going to be helpful. Then he says, the person who has righteousness will accept that. But the person who is wretched, away from the right path, he will just, avoid that, and he will end in the fire of Jahannam in a state that he will neither die nor live. He will be in that state perpetually. And then a message which is very important. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. Successful, in Surah Shams we had, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Here you have قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. The word zakat or tazakka here, or zakkaha in Surah Shams, basically this means to purify something. And from that literal meaning you have zakat, means when you purify your wealth, you give away the dues which are there in our faith, then your wealth becomes purified. Now here, it's basically explained in a different way. Most of the time you will see in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always talks about salat first and then zakat later on. Prayers come first, charity comes later on. But in Surah al-Aʿlā, it has been in a way reversed. It might be more relevant to, let's say, Eid al-Fitr, where the requirement is that before you come to namaz Eid, you have to make sure you pay the zakat fitr. It has to be paid before the namaz. Those who don't do the namaz Eid, of course, for them, they have the whole day before Maghrib to pay that. But it's interesting that we cannot just confine that to the day of Eid al-Fitr. In Quran, there are many ayat, even if you look at the ayat which is known as ayatul birr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what is righteousness? And there you will see that after the aqidah and the belief system, before salat and other wajib dues, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the willingness to give from your own money and wealth for those who are poor and needy and those among your relatives, and this is where we see that the test of aqidah, true belief, is to see whether I and you are willing to share what we have, not as an obligation, rather from whatever I have, to share with those who are poor and needy. That's where I many times say that, don't only look at zakat is if it's applicable on you with the conditions of wujub or khums. Also look beyond that. See whether you're willing to part away with these things which belong to you now. And that's one of the signs of saying that, we trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He says, whatever you give in my way, I'm going to multiply that and reward you in the akhirah, in a better manner. And that's where the term قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى, successful is the person who gives in charity. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ, and remembers the name of the Lord, فَصَلَّى. And then he does the prayers. And this is where we see that the ayat continues, that basically people prefer the dunya, whereas al-akhiratu khayrun wa abqa. The akhirah, the hereafter, is better and everlasting. The dunya is there, it will end one day. And this surah ends by the emphasis that this is not only the message of one faith, all the revealed religions have the same message. إِنَّ هَذَا لَفِي الصُّحُفِ الْأُولَى. This is there in the scriptures of the ancient time, even the Suhuf Ibrahim wa Musa. Even the books of Ibrahim and Musa has the same message. That if you believe, then you have to also part away with your own hard-earned income. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to live up to that expectation of maintaining our soul and fulfilling and proving our loyalty to Allah, Rasul, and the Imam. Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, inshallah. I think I took the same time, but anyway. اللهم صل على سيد المرسلين والشفيع المذنبين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى إمام المتقين وأمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله عليه وعلى سيدة النساء العالمين سيدتنا فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلوات الله عليها وعلى سيد الشباب أهل الجنة الحسن المجتبى والحسين الشهيد بكربلاء عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على مولانا الحجة بن الحسن صاحب العصر والزمان ما أحيا آثار البدء والطغيان هادي بأبنية الشرك والنفاق حاصل فر البغي والشقاق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آبائه الكرام ما اتصلت الليالي والأيام. اللهم عجل فرج وصح المخرج واكحل ناظرنا بنظرة منا إليه واجعلنا من المستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.